Joining us now to talk about this issue, Dr Alexander Titov from Queen's University in Belfast in Northern Ireland joins us. A very good evening to you, and thank you so much for speaking to us. Perhaps let's just start with that last sentence in that excerpt on what exactly occurred. Do you concur that it is a humiliation, a blow for the Kremlin?
It's a big sort of symbolic blow to the prestige because, the Crimean Bridge was the symbol of successful integration of the Crimean Peninsula into the Russian Federation. And Ukrainians, since it's began its construction, and ever since we're talking about its destruction, now they kind of successfully did disrupted part of it. I think the damage is not as great as initially thought, but symbolically speaking, it is certainly a very significant blow to Kremlin's prestige that they were not able to protect this key infrastructure and symbol of Russia's grip on Crimea.
Perhaps if you could just draw a visual map for us in terms of this area. I understand it's on the Taman Peninsula side of the bridge. Talk to us about the control of this area and why it's of strategic importance to the Kremlin.
Well, I mean, it's the bridge connects Russia proper with Crimea, which at the time of its construction, before the Russian invasion in February 2022, was the only land link between Russia and Ukraine. Now they also have controlling the northern parts of Ukraine, north of Crimea. So there is additional routes to Crimea, but that route has been essential for supplying Russia's military in the south of Ukraine, and also supplying Crimea. It's also there's 2.5 million people living in Crimea relying on this bridge for supplies of food and fuel and so forth. It's a very kind of key juncture. In many ways, Crimea itself lies at the core of the current conflict, because since its annexation in 2014, its unsettled status has been really is the kind of cause of kind of Moscow's frustration with Ukraine's inability to move on kind of with peace talks and so forth, and eventually they kind of led to escalation of conflicts in February 2022. So Crimea is the key to the whole conflict, and bridge is the key to Crimea.
So, as you say, the symbolism thereof is also important. When it was constructed at billions of pounds, it was touted as the bridge of the century. What was the vision behind it then, following the annexation of Crimea?
Well, you know that when you have a territory, creating a physical link between the mainland and the territory, in a sense, brings the territory both physically inside the country, but also metaphorically as well. Every time there is a kind of problems, we've seen this in Britain, that every time there is problems with the Northern Ireland, Boris Johnson used to talk about constructing a bridge or a tunnel, kind of as this, which was never going to happen, but nevertheless, the rhetoric was there. Well, so that President Putin did is actually did construct such a bridge to link and completely incorporate Crimea with Russia proper. It's been they're both symbolically that Crimea is part of Russia, but also, as I said, in practical terms, both as a supply of key materials, fuel, but also of weapons and so forth. So Crimean Bridge is both symbolically and physically very important for Russia's hold on to the disputed territory.
So Kiev not really claiming an outright responsibility for this explosion, but does it give it some sort of momentum in the conflict, this damage, the explosion to the bridge, and obviously what the Russians have termed as a terrorism, Ukrainian terrorism?
Well, so Ukraine has been talking about it ever since the bridge was proposed, been constructed, since the war started, and they say as soon as we have capacity to strike it, we will strike it, and so forth and so forth. So yeah, I mean, I don't think there's much doubt who's behind it, and it was very carefully planned, carefully executed operation, which. There were people. I think we were lucky that it was so few people actually killed civilians when the explosion happened. But yeah, and I guess there is an issue of for Kiev how far it wants to claim outright responsibility, because it did. For example, I mean, now there is. Kind of evidence in the American press. New York Times published article about Kiev's responsibility for assassination of a Russian journalist in Moscow, Dugina, a few weeks back, which Kiev denied. Now you have this attack on the bridge. You also have explosions on the key gas pipelines from Russia to Germany a few weeks back. So that's been unclaimed and unconcerned. But there is overall pattern that the Kiev authorities have to be thread a careful line between being resolute and effective in attacking Russian infrastructure, but at the same time not overstepping the boundaries so that they would lose sympathy in the West as well. Although I don't think that's they were anywhere near that. But nevertheless, there is that's such a worry that if they take it too far, there could be a problem for them.
Well, this is also against the backdrop of, although initially denying it, the blasts on some key military sites in the Crimea, including Saki airports in Crimea. So how does this all stack up then? Well,
I mean, the Ukrainians certainly been very effective in the sense that they are very maybe not as effective militarily, those strikes on Crimea and on the bridge itself, but in terms of symbolism, it's been extremely effective. But also militarily as well, of course, thinking of the cruiser and some of the planes being destroyed in Crimea and so forth, so all the way important ones. Why they deny it? Well, I mean, it's all tongue-in-cheek. I think it's sort of part of the kind of PR operation. Don't forget that President Zelensky came from has a media background. He's extremely good at creating and conducting media operations as well. So Ukrainians been very very effective for this compared to the Russians. Yeah, so this kind of tongue-in-cheek, with denying, not denying, and so forth, has been kind of the hallmark. But bottom line, I think it's clear who's done it and why they did it. The next question is what Russia's going to do about it next.
And what do you expect them or foresee them doing?
Well, I think the issue here that Russia has certainly capacity to strike in civilian infrastructure in Ukraine as well. So we've seen that they did strike at the power plants after the Ukrainian successful offensive in around Kharkov, and we can see repeated strikes as well. I mean, there has been not as extensive and systematic attacks on Ukrainian infrastructure throughout Ukraine as you might have expected, given Russia's capacity in terms of its missile arsenal and so forth. So we might see stepping up of this practice in the near future. But at the same time, I think what's happening in Russia now is that they are mobilizing resources for to change the facts on the ground and perhaps stop and reverse Ukrainian offensive and go into offensive themselves. And I guess you can imagine that they are kind of preparing strikes on Ukrainian infrastructure at some point to coincide with the upcoming counteroffensive, which probably would take in a few months' time or not, or so. So there is still a lot of escalation that the Russians can do against Ukrainian infrastructure, but equally it has been shown that Ukrainians are also capable of striking at very symbolic and important targets in Russia.